This is Upside Down in the Middle of Nowhere, chapter 25 and 26. We drifted past the first dead body when the sun was bright and high in the sky, and the body was floating upside down and bonked right into the side of the boat. Mama shoved Celie and the twins' heads into her side and hiding them eyes from the sickening sight. I couldn't stop staring. Close your eyes, Mama said, but I couldn't. My eyes were wide open. I tried to push the ugly thoughts away of Daddy and Georgie floating out there somewhere, and I felt sick. Nothing looked familiar, and I knew we were in the ninth ward where I'd been living my whole life, but I was lost, and we drifted in Mr. Oscar Dupree's boat, and I only counted 3 houses that weren't completely underwater or outright destroyed, or sitting cockeyed crazy like our house was. Over here, a man standing on a roof yelled at us. "Hey, that man's hollering at you, Mr. Oscar," Celie said. "Mm-hmm," he mumbled. I seen him look up at the man without moving his head. The man on the roof wasn't alone. There were about 10 people up there with him, and some of them were kids like Celie and the twins. A large, heavy-set woman walked to the edge of the roof and threw something. The empty Coke can landed in the boat, barely missing the side of Killeen's head resting in Mama's lap. I jumped up, rocking the boat, and hollered, "Are you crazy? You almost hit my baby brother." "Crazy?" the round woman screamed and threw a string of cuss words down at us. "I'll show you crazy if you don't get us off this hot roof." When that woman started flapping her fat sausage-looking arms, I knew right away who it was. "Miss Lowell! Hey, it's me, Armani Curtis. I don't give a rat's behind who you are. All I'm saying is you'll best get that white man over here and get me and mine off the roof." With every word, that woman's voice got louder and squeakier. Mr. Oscar never took his eyes off the water in front of the boat, and he said real quiet so Miss Lowell and her family couldn't hear, "There's no room on this boat. I'm sorry, darling." I stole a quick look over at Mama, and he knew that Mr. Oscar was right. There was no room, especially for the ones like the likes of Miss Lowell. I still felt terrible just leaving them there like that. "Miss Lowell, there ain't enough room. We sent someone for you. Miss Lowell, there ain't enough room. We'll send someone for you." I had to turn. I had to turn around and shout at her because we'd already drifted past the house. That woman and half her family threw anything and everything they could to get their hands on us, and luckily none of them were quarterbacks for the Saints. From then on, it was mostly quiet, bumpy, roundabout ride, and I hung my head trying to breathe in the fading lavender smells buried deep down in Kayla's hair. I tried to do something to cover up the gassy, rotten smell coming from the nasty water. Mama all but came up out of the boat when somewhere close by gunshots rang out and the sound of dogs barking blasted through the air. Mr. Oscar Dupree kept saying under his breath, "We're almost there," never one time responding to the sights and sounds around us, and I was beginning to wonder if there was really a place called there. The air in my lungs stopped moving altogether when I seen the steeple of our church sticking up out of the water, and the Bibles. There were floating Bibles everywhere. Celia reached over to the side of the boat and scooped one of the books out of the putrid water, and it smacked with a wet thunk on the floor of the boat. None of us said nothing, but we knew she'd done the right thing. Our flash of hope I got from seeing something I knew and recognized got swallowed up quick by the rush of nausea that filled my whole body. Uncle T-Bone's house was gone. If the steeple was poking out of the Bible-filled water, my good sense told me that Uncle T-Bone's house should have been right there. Even if it was under the water, it should have been right where I was looking, but it wasn't. Mama let out a gasp. "Y'all all right, Mama?" Mr. Oscar asked. "Y'all all right, ma'am?" Mr. Oscar asked. Mama squeezed his eyes shut and shook her head no. "We're almost there," he said again in that same calm voice. I was fixing to ask him once and for all if I knew where the heck we were going when my mouth snapped shut. Something in the water caught my eye, and a wave of familiar swept through me, bringing tingles to the back of my neck, and I stared, trying with all my might to remember what the floating thing was and where I'd seen it before. And the thought crossed my mind to ask Celie when out of nowhere the thought slammed into my head. Floating there in the water, right along the waterlogged Bibles, was a big, floppy tangerine hat, the exact thing Miss Shug Lorraine wore so proud on her head at my birthday party. I leaned over the side of the tiny metal boat, Nessie, and vomited lemon pie and bottled water. Chapter 26. My head was pounding, and the sour taste still lingered when I seen Mr. Frank's old beat-down school bus sitting upside down on top of the building next to the donut shop. It was lying there like a dead animal off to the side of the road with its legs stuck straight up in the air, except it was the Goodyear tires pointing to the sky instead of stiff armadillo legs. The bright red shingles of the donut shop were poking out of the murky water, and the shop my daddy got donuts from at the end of every month was the only one in the whole ninth ward with a roof the color of snakeberry red. A new batch of tears was building up when all of a sudden Mr. Oscar brought the little boat to a stop. This is going to be as far as I could take y'all, he said. My mama made herself busy gathering up the babies. But Mr. Oscar, there ain't nothing here. I swooped my arm trying to show us the nice man he made a mistake. He was fiddling with the boat engine and was obviously too busy to notice that he stopped his boat in the middle of nowhere surrounded by water. Water's shallow here, Mr. Oscar said, to no one in particular. He wasn't making no eye contact. Shallow? The familiar feeling of panic was creeping in. What are you trying to say? He's saying the water's not very deep, Celie said. I glared at my sister. I know what shallow means, Celie. I was surprised when Mr. Oscar was the first one to get out of the boat, mostly because he didn't have to get out at all. When he stood in the disgusting murky water, it came up to somewhere between his kneecaps and his belly. Celie picked up the damp Bible from the bottom of the boat and brushed it off with her hand. Let me see, darling, Mr. Oscar said, and took hold of the used-to-be waterlogged book. He pulled a red bandana out from his back pocket and wrapped up the Bible in a cloth and handed it to my sister. Celie just beamed. Oh, thank you, Mr. Oscar. Yep, is all he said. Celie put the wrapped-up book down in her book sack and nodded like she was good to go, and I closed my mouth and rolled my eyes. I couldn't believe she'd stick anything that had been in the water inside her book sack. Ground's slippery, Mr. Oscar Dupree said, still keeping his eyes busy, not looking at any of us. Y'all be careful and don't slip. Whatever. It was obnoxious. Obvious he really didn't care, or he wouldn't dump us like a batch of unwanted kittens at the side of the road. Mr. Oscar offered his hand to Mama, and she shook it and took it. She didn't move. She held Colleen with the other arm and stood there for the longest time staring at the man whose hand she was holding. A feeling of relief swept over me, and Mama wasn't going to get off the boat. She had too much good sense for that, and I wondered how she was going to inform the man that he had to take us somewhere with land. Mr. Oscar gave his head a little nod, and Mama nodded back at him. I got you, ma'am, he said. I ain't going to let you fall. Mama turned and handed Colleen to me without saying a word, and a pounding started in my head, and I reached for Mama's locket, forgetting that Mama was still wearing it. Mama grabbed a hold of the corner of her dress and held it up all ladylike, and I hoped she wasn't thinking that she was going to prevent it from getting wet. The boat rocked back and forth till Mama was finally up and over the side of the boat and down in the water. As soon as she was standing, Mama's lime green party dress took to floating and puffed up like a parachute all around her, and the big air bubble caught up under her dress was the problem. Mama started doing her best to push the little giant silly bubble down without making a fuss. Kayla was the first one to start laughing. Funny, Mama, she said, pointing at the ridiculous sight. Celie's giggle made Mama smile, and before I knew what was happening, Mr. Oscar started to chuckle. His big old stomach took to bobbing up and down, causing the water to make ripples. I've seen enough. I set Colleen down at the bottom of the boat and jumped over the side, not even pausing for a second to consider what I was jumping into. It made a terrible splash, and Meemaw's boots filled with water, making my efforts to get Mama's clumsy and slow. I slapped at Mama's dress with my hands every which way, and I didn't care that my splashing was getting Mama and Mr. Oscar's faces wet, and I didn't care that I was scaring my brother and sisters to death. I kept on slapping till I shoved all of Mama's poofed-up dress down into the water where it belonged and looked normal. There, I said, satisfied and out of breath. I looked at Mama for the first time since she jumped off the dry boat. The look on her face stopped me cold. Her eyes were huge but droopy in the corners, and her mouth was turned as far down as I could have gone without the whole thing just slipping right off her face. Mr. Oscar had his head down, staring at his own big belly. What? I said, turning toward the boat. Celia was clutching the twins, tears streaming down the baby's face. Colleen looked at me like he didn't know who I was. Mama touched my arms. Armani, you all right? Sure, Mama. I'm just fine. Fine as pie. My voice was extra high and disrespectful. We're all just fine, ain't we, Mama? I glared at her, sliding my head, crying. Mr. Oscar Dupree had his arms around me. Hush, hush, she said. I wiped my teary face in the man's shirt sleeve. You're going to be fine, baby. I nodded, and I couldn't look at him. I wiped my nose on the back of my hand, and I reached into the boat and took Colleen from Celie. It was plain that he didn't want to come to me by the way he pulled and tried to latch onto Celie for his dear life, and I didn't care. I gave him an extra firm tug and looked away. I tried to stomp my way over to Mama, but the dang boots made it feel like I had melons tied to my feet, and Colleen sat up high on my hip, and his legs dragged to the water, and I plopped my baby brother into Mama's arms. I turned back to get another kid before Mama or anybody else had a chance to say a word.